podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone and welcome to How Are the Podcast. It's Gav and you join us for a news update, chit-chat type pod as we bring you some Sunderland news and banter. Banter, there's a word I haven't used in a while. There are three fine gentlemen, and we do use that a lot, fine gentlemen, but they are fine gentlemen. They're all with me today. First up, we've got Bomber with his lovely orange and white shirt, which you can't see, but it has brightened up my day. Hello, Bomber.
Yeah, it's an advert for YouTube material, isn't it? Yeah. Hello, mate. You okay?
Yeah. We're going to start putting you on YouTube if you start turning up in these fancy outfits. You did have a hat on as well, which you've taken off, I've noticed.
Yeah, my head got a bit hot, so it's
don't blame me. It is warm today. Also with us is Andrew Smithson. Hello, mate.
Hello, I'm feeling very underdressed now. I've just got a plain black t-shirt on. It's I don't fit the air brief, I don't think.
Well, when I joined the call, Chris was sat there in a white polo, and I'm like, "What you done? You've been to court? You've done something wrong? You've been a Christian?" And and I thought you look very smart. And then Bomber rocks up with that thing on. But yeah, Chris is with us as well. Hello, mate.
Yes, I'm here for the four-way highway in my smart shirt, apparently. But it was the tone of surprise in your voice, though, that I was a little bit disappointed in, Gav. Normally, obviously, I normally dress up like a scruff for these things, apparently.
Me and Andrew text each other off air and make sure we're wearing the same thing, don't we, mate? We've both got our black tops on and punjabi heads.
The milk chairmen today, honestly.
That's it. So, like I said, we are here for a chat, and Sunderland being Sunderland, keeping us busy, as we always seem to say on these pods, have decided to make some more moves in the transfer market, it seems, because news broke on Tuesday afternoon about the Granit Xhaka deal, which, of course, has rumbled on for a week or so now without anything really concrete coming out. But it was actually David Ornstein, who writes for The Athletic, amongst others, reputable transfer journalist, who brought the story, and he said, exclusive, Granit Xhaka informs Bayer Leverkusen he only wants to join Sunderland. As the club talks continue, agreement now in place between the 32-year-old and Sunderland. Bayern have been asked by the Switzerland midfielder to close the deal rapidly. Negotiations are ongoing. So that's a big story, of course, because Granit Xhaka would be a massive, massive signing for Sunderland. It isn't over the line yet, but still, this is about as close as we've looked to signing him. And for a newly promoted team, somebody like Granit Xhaka would represent such a massive, massive amount of business. Because he's won everything. He's played at the highest level for many years now. And aside from the players we've already signed, he's a little bit different, isn't he? So, that's obviously a massive, massive story. I'll come to you first, Chris, because we've been talking about Xhaka for a week or so now in sort of loose terms, and then we played that game on Monday night where the midfield three looked so fluid in the first half, and everybody's raving about how well they played together. Yeah, in a friendly, but still played very, very well. And you're thinking, well, that must be the midfield for the West Ham game because they look fantastic together. And then this crops up and you think, bloody hell, if we throw Granit Xhaka into the mix, what a midfield we could end up with to start the season.
Yeah. No, exactly. And it's all about options, isn't it? We're talking about, there's been, you talk about when Henderson was linked and all this, and people were saying, would he fit and all this? And this is just a complete level above. People saying even Henderson at the beginning of the summer might have been reaching high and thinking, can we bring him back? And it's unreal now that we're looking at Granit Xhaka, who is a step above and younger. Not only is he, we talked about Jordan Henderson coming to the end, Granit Xhaka he's played nearly 100 games in 2 seasons for Bayer Leverkusen. I mean, that would be an unbelievable signing to go in with those other players, though, because we're going to need options throughout the season. Because look, you look at previous years gone by when clubs have struggled, and 1 injury, 2 injuries. Me and Andrew have been talking recently when we've been going back to previous Sunderland Premier League seasons when we've gone down, and we're like, oh well, he got injured at the start of the season, and then that's it. It's almost like, well, you're struggling from that point. We pick a couple of injuries up in that midfield, and you look and you think, actually, we'll still be all right. Let's say the deal does go through, but you're talking 4 weeks, something like that. We've gone from almost saying, oh, it would be fantastic if we got 35-year-old Jordan Henderson in, who's hardly played, to now one of the top midfielders in Europe in just the space of 4 weeks. And that's where it's aimed. I mean, I think I spoke to, I can't remember which one. I was speaking to, I think it might have been Doogie from Sky. I can't remember anyway. One of them. But we were saying the two things that completely made everything snowball was the two quick deals. So Bellingham leaving told all those young players, come here, we'll give you a pathway. You can go on to bigger and better things if you want, if you do well here. And the Enzo Lafay told everybody very quickly that big players want to come here and we're paying decent money. We're going to play decent football because we're bringing top-class players in. And Granit Xhaka would... you talk about that, how fluid they are. I mean, because it was interesting with Diarra playing in that more advanced role as well, that actually Granit Xhaka just sitting behind some of them. I mean, you just want to see them play, don't you? You just want that West Ham game to come now.
Yeah, Andrew, we've talked a little bit about Xhaka this week, but this, like I said, is about as close as we've come to this being a reality. And there's been a couple of occasions over the last week or so where there've been stories leaked out through the media, maybe, might have been bullshit for all we know, but reports in the German media and stuff about, a Saudi team being the front runners. I think it was in the Italian press that Milan wanted him. And when you see that, you're like, oh, you almost think it's too good to be true, because how could Sunderland possibly compete with Milan or a Saudi team who can pay him, ridiculous amounts of money? So then hear from his agent, and I'll read this full quote, but hear from his agent that he wants to take on the challenge is unbelievable. I'll just read the full quote, which is, his agent is Jose Noguera, and he told Sky Germany, "We've reached an agreement in principle with Sunderland. Granit wants to return to the Premier League. Sunderland excites him. He wants to take on this challenge. We hope Leverkusen will respect his wish to leave and that the clubs will find an agreement soon." When you read that about, as what Chris just said, one of the top midfielders in Europe, it's just a world away from what we've been used to in recent years.
Yeah. And that phrase there, that Sunderland excites him, that's brilliant, because we do look as if we're trying to have a real crack in the Premier League this year. We're not playing games here. We're trying to be really serious. You mentioned a couple of other clubs he's been linked there with, Gav. I wasn't too worried about that, just because I think if you want to buy top-class players, there are going to be other clubs interested. You'd be more concerned if other clubs weren't sniffing around. And something I think that will work in our favour this year is there's a World Cup coming up, isn't there? And now Granit Xhaka is still involved with the Switzerland setup. I think he might even be captain. So he's not coming here just to pick up a wage check and not do anything. He wants to be in good nick and in good form ahead of that. So it's as we say, if it happens, really exciting. I think we could have a top quality player on our hands.
Yeah, you're always really enthusiastic, Bomber. What was it like reading that and seeing that kind of enthusiasm from a top player towards Sunderland? I mean, we've really sold the project to the world. When you look at what we've done and the business we've already done, I think everyone's looking at Sunderland now and seeing what a big opportunity this could be. And if you can then add, we've paid over 100 million for players. If you can then add somebody like Granit Xhaka to the mix, you're telling the rest of the world you're serious.
Oh, absolutely. And to kind of go back to your first question, it's certainly not a name I expected to be linked with a move to Sunderland. And then just when you think it might happen, as you and Andrew mentioned, you see the likes of Inter Milan or be involved and the Saudi teams be involved, and you think, oh, actually, we might miss out here because, like you said, Saudi will pay him as much as he wants. And he's that kind of age profile where, his legs certainly wouldn't have gone at 32. He's probably got another 2, possibly 3 good years left in him, which may be the reason why he's chosen to come to the Premier League. And, how long has it been since somebody has publicly gone on record to say that the project at Sunderland excites them? It's certainly been a while. So it's a massive coup from my point of view. It's a massive coup if it does, and by the time this goes out, it might be signed, sealed, and delivered, and everything else. And for me, it's kind of the missing part of our puzzle at the minute. It's certainly in that midfield. We discussed on the reaction pod to the Lisbon game about how good that midfield three is going to be and where we now see Dan Neil. I'm sure we'll come on to what this potentially means for Dan Neil, but it's Granit Xhaka is certainly, as we sit now, an upgrade on Dan Neil. In 5 years' time, that might not necessarily be the case. Dan Neil might be the second coming of Granit Xhaka, but I think we can't understate how good a signing this is. We're talking about somebody who's played at World Cups, who's played at Euros finals, who's captained his country, who's played over 200 Premier League games for a title, season in, season out, title challenging Arsenal team. Somebody who, is probably just at the peak of their powers. And let's not forget, is, statistically, the 16th, well, not statistically, but from Ballon d'Or statistics, is the 16th best player in the world. So, yeah, I mean, just to say that, when was the last time Sunderland had somebody in their team that sat in the top 20 of the Ballon d'Or list? I think you'd have to probably go back, Sam. But yeah, as you said, it doesn't take much to get me excited when we're talking about these things. And he's about as excited. The prospect of signing Granit Xhaka is about as exciting, makes me about as excited as I've been since the Wembley final.
You must have forgot when Callum McFadden finished runner-up to Ronaldo in the Ballon d'Or. You must have forgot about that one.
2021, or maybe it was the COVID year, so I missed it.
Chris, what do you make of the fact that the agent appears to be pushing this back to Leverkusen? Because what we're reading here is that he's got an agreement with Sunderland. He wants to come to Sunderland. They're now putting pressure on his club to sanction the move. And a lot of the talk over the last week's been about the fee, about how they wanted a certain amount, and maybe the likes of us and the other teams interested weren't quite prepared to go as far as that. It almost feels like a bit of posture in this.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because if you look at the last, he played, well, according to the stats, he played 49 games in total last season, and the season before that he played 50 games. So he's not coming to Sunderland to not play, because he's a Bayer Leverkusen first teamer. 99 games in 2 seasons. That's a hell of a lot of football coming up to, as for a 32-year-old. And they signed him for, I think it was just short of 25 million or something a couple of years ago. And I was actually quite surprised how long a contract he signed. So he must have signed a 5-year contract, because his contract goes through till 2028 at Bayer Leverkusen. So look, if they've just signed a player for 20 odd million and he plays 2 full seasons and he's in their plans, and if you look, that Bayer Leverkusen are going through a bit of a summer of upheaval in terms of obviously Alonso going to Real Madrid, and they already lost a couple of big players. I'm trying to think who. Frimpong left. Florian Wirtz went to Liverpool. So they're going. So they don't want to lose Granit Xhaka. He's almost a mainstay in that side. He's someone who's going to calm everything down next season. And then suddenly there's a chance that they're losing him. So of course, if Granit Xhaka has kind of made his mind up and he says, well, actually, I think it could be almost a case of he's looking around himself at Bayer Leverkusen and said, right, well, this was a brilliant project when I came here for a couple of years, and now this is kind of fallen apart. So what's next at Bayer Leverkusen? And he's thinking, I want a new project. And we keep saying that word about Sunderland, but that's how players look at it. If he could just sit on his money and go, well, I've kind of done this at Bayer Leverkusen. I'm not going to win the Champions League with him. What's the achievement at Bayer Leverkusen this season? And where they go, and he's probably think they're on a bit of a downward track. So he comes to us, and if he sat down and talked with Christian Speakburn and Gasolfi and Labrie, they'll have showed him the likes of Diarra, Siddiqui, Adingra, Chems and Talby, and just went, look, we're going to surround you with pace. We're going to put pace right across that midfield, players who can run up and down, and you just read the game and just sit amongst all of this pace in the midfield and just do your thing. And I mean, for a player at this stage of his career, that must just be almost like a dream. to go, yep, just surround us with runners. I'll sit there, I'll read the game, I'll break it up, I'll give it to the guys with pace. They can do their thing, and I'll sit, and it just sounds perfect. And then the whole Dan Neil thing, that if him and Dan, Dan Neil's 23. This is going to be his first season in the Premier League. If you remember what happened in his first season in the Championship, it took him a while to adjust. I remember him getting sent off a couple of times, and we were going, okay, he needs to kind of learn how to play in the Championship. He's going to go through that learning curve again in the Premier League for at least a season or two. So stick Granit Xhaka in there and say, look, play alongside me for a few games. And it gives us the flexibility to put two in front of the back four. There's going to be games where we're under the cosh. So put, Dan Neil, Granit Xhaka in front of the back four and put a bit of pace ahead of them. And then you've got the African Cup of Nations as well, where you're going to need a big squad. I mean, everything about it just sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was Florian Plettenberg from Sky Germany, Andrew, who broke the story and spoke to his agent. And just interesting, because if you go back to Monday, it was Florian Plettenberg who broke the news about Xhaka being in talks with Sunderland and Fenerbahce. So, literally 20 hours prior to this news breaking, Plettenberg said Sunderland and Fenerbahce are currently the two most concrete options for Granit Xhaka. Both teams have submitted offers. Leverkusen have rejected both offers, and both teams want to improve their bids. So, if he really had a choice between staying at Leverkusen, going back to the Premier League with Sunderland, or signing for, is Mourinho the Fenerbahce manager, or is he Galatasaray? I can't remember now.
You don't want to get those two clubs mixed up.
They should merge, those two clubs.
So I'm not too sure who's there, but regardless, if those are the two biggest offers on the table, I'm not being big-headed here, and I am the biggest Sunderland fan ever, but I don't blame him, really. I think, to come back to the Premier League, where he's, had a fantastic career in the top flight in England, to come back and show that he's still got it, and be very well paid for it, and as Chris says, be surrounded by young players. I think that's probably quite important at this stage in his career, because you look at Leverkusen and the team that Alonso built there. He was one of the elder statesmen in that team, and some young players who've gone on to get big moves, the likes of Wirtz and Frimpong have left, and there are other really good young players at Leverkusen. It's clearly something he thrives on, being surrounded by young players, and I think there's a clear lack, isn't there, in Sunderland's squad of that alternative. Like, we've got a very talented team and a very talented squad, but the one glaring omission at the minute is proper experience. Like, somebody like, I mean, you don't get much more experience than Xhaka when it comes to the Premier League. So I think it's just there's a perfect role here for him at Sunderland. It's not like when we were talking about Jordan Henderson the other week, and we were like, well, where does he fit in, really? Because at 35 and his best years are behind him, and we don't know if he can still do it at the top flight. Where does Henderson really fit in, even if he is still a really good player? Whereas with Xhaka, because he's a little bit younger and he's still, as you have said, played almost 100 games and won the Bundesliga, won other trophies with Leverkusen in recent years. It's, you can see the obvious role for him in this Sunderland team, can't you?
Oh, definitely. He is comfortable in that role as a leader because he's been captain at some quality clubs. He's been captain of his country. I think as well, I seem to remember, hasn't he kind of stepped up and spoken to, I don't know if it was at Arsenal or Leverkusen. I think some fans were getting on the players' backs, and he was one of the players who, like, at training, stopped, got out of his car and actually had a face-to-face chat. I think I've remembered that correctly. And again, that suggests to me that there's a bit of maturity about him. He is happy to be that role as a spokesman and a leader for maybe some of the younger lads. Another thing he brings, which we don't have loads of, is a little bit of height. He's not a giant, but he's certainly not, he's not short. So that's a good thing. And I think 2 points this potential deal tells us is, it was only, where are we now? It was only on Monday, perhaps, where the Loriente deal collapsed. And of course, people put 2 and 2 together and come up with 5, and there was different stories as to why that maybe failed. I bet the club are over the moon that it's coming out that terms with the player has been agreed. Because if this doesn't happen now, there's not going to be any fingers pointed at the club. It would be presumably pointed at Bayer Leverkusen deciding they didn't want to sell him. The other thing it says is, if we believe what we've seen, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus has been involved and had a word with Granit Xhaka. And that's another good thing, that the chairman's on board with this. He's not just sitting back and expecting things to happen. He's taken on a bit of a hands-on role where necessary, and perhaps the way he spoke to Xhaka has maybe been one of the things that's convinced him that, this is a club that's together, it's got a plan in place, and it's heading in the right direction. So there's lots of different things that this deal tells us, even if for whatever reason it doesn't happen.
A few more quotes here, Bomber, from the agent. He said, Granit has enjoyed his time at Leverkusen, and we are very appreciative of everything the club have done for him. We hope Leverkusen can find an agreement with Sunderland and are sure talks will continue in an amicable manner due to the strong relationship between Granit and Leverkusen. And he also went on to say, Granit understands his importance to Leverkusen, and although he wishes to join Sunderland, is fully respectful of Leverkusen. So obviously this hasn't got tit for tat yet, but I think the fact that the agent is talking directly to TV tells me it's to apply a bit of pressure. It's to say, come on, let's get a move on. Let's get this laddie's move. Are you confident? Because as we saw with the Loriente deal, that looked done. And I know the circumstances behind why that happened, which are nothing to do with this, but it just shows you, doesn't it? These things can break down at last minute. And, we're getting really excited about a potential deal for Granit Xhaka. But at the end of the day, if his club don't want to sell him for whatever Sunderland are offering, they're not going to sell him. And we know what our club are like. We are quite happy to move on from deals if it's, going out of our control, if we don't like the terms, if there's something we just don't like about it, we will move on. So as great as this signing would be, we need clearly to find a resolution soon.
Yeah, you're right. It's one that needs to get over the line sooner rather than later, because the longer, if it does drag on, the longer it drags on, the more likely it is that it will possibly break down, whether that's from it looks like if it does, it would only be from Leverkusen. And you're right. The only reason an agent comes out and makes statements like that in public is to apply a bit of pressure to their players' current club to make the move happen. I think normally when an agent does come out and speak on behalf of their player and say those sort of things, and it's he made no bones about it. He's name dropped Sunderland and said that my player wants to go to Sunderland. There's no ambiguity there. And normally when there is a matter of fact and as clear as that, those things tend to happen because it's been made clear to Leverkusen that he doesn't want to stay there. I think I completely agree with what Chris said earlier, is that he's, in terms of his success and career at Leverkusen, that's probably peaked with the players that they've lost. The fact that they've lost Alonso, they're not going to do any better than they have done over the last couple of seasons.
The fact Eric Ten Hag's went in.
Yeah. And didn't they lose like an under-17s team or under-21s team or something in one of their pre-season games recently?
Over in Brazil, they got battered, I think.
Yeah. So it stands to reason that we're just quibbling over a fee, which is an interesting point in itself, because every other signing that we've made up until now that we've paid a fee for has been with a sell-on fee in mind. If you think of the Diarras and the Siddiquis and all the others that we've signed, have been with the intention that we'll probably lose them if they turn out well. We'll lose them for 3 times the value in a couple of seasons' time. Whereas obviously there's not really a sell-on value for Xhaka. Xhaka's very much about the here and now. Bring him in for a couple of seasons to make a difference in the team, helps cement us as a Premier League team again, and then it'll kind of be like, thanks very much, and he'll see a contract out, or we'll move him on at a loss. So I think it's an important point that you make about the finances of this deal. I think the numbers, was it 10 million euros or 10 million pounds was the latest that I've seen. Yeah. So if Leverkusen are trying to hold on for 15, let's say, we might say, well, actually, that's a loss that we're not willing to accept in 2 or 3 years' time. My personal opinion would be it'd be 15 million euros, pounds, whatever, well spent. and actually 10 for what he brings would be an absolute bargain, a steal. So it's interesting the approach that the club would potentially take and just saying, right, we're going to write off 10 million euros over the next 3 years to get to help bring him in and help solidify us as a Premier League force once again. And let's not forget, he's 32, but it wasn't that long. He's got nothing to prove back in the Premier League. He was still like I said before, one of the best thought of or best rated players in the world. And it was only last summer in the Euros, playing for Switzerland, that got him into that reckoning for the Ballon d'Or. I think Switzerland played 5 games in that Euros, and he got man of the match for 2 of them, possibly even 3. And he was basically the best player on the pitch when they stuffed Italy and knocked Italy out. So he's not a player that's kind of coming here for a swan song. Definitely not, regardless of whether he, say, he signed a 3-year contract and took him to 35. A 35-year-old Granit Xhaka, I'm sure, would still be able to do it. There's no sign of any kind of let up in his fitness or his legs or age catching up with him. He's still a top quality player. So yeah, to bring him in for 3 years, let's say for 10, 12 million euros, just get it done.
Yeah. Keith Downey in his tweet said, I was told last night after the friendly against Sporting Lisbon that the club were waiting for the green light on signing a player. Xhaka is clearly that man. So let's see where that goes. I just want to move it along a little bit while still be on the topic of Xhaka, because he's been mentioned a couple of times, but Dan Neil has been a bit of a topic of conversation, particularly since the Sporting Lisbon game finished, because we saw how well Siddiqui, Diarra and Lafay played in that first half. And it does raise questions because, as we've seen now in the friendlies that we've played, Dan Neil has been a part of the second string, effectively, playing. He came on in the second half against Lisbon along with Roberts, Brown, Abdullahi, Alexic, Triantis, Johnson, Lavery, Jones, these players who aren't probably going to be starting when we come to start the season. So it makes you wonder, like, where does Dan Neil fit into all of this? And of course, we know Dan Neil's contract still hasn't been sorted. So he's got, around a year left on his deal. We know with PSR being such a big thing now in the game, that if you've got an academy player who's worth any money, they represent pure profit on the balance sheet. And, if he's not going to sign a new deal, the club will be ruthless and they will sell him. And all these things are being talked about, Chris, because of, 1, how much money we've spent on midfielders, 2, how quickly they've clearly settled in, and now 3, because we're looking to be signing Granit Xhaka, who, for all intents and purposes, plays Dan Neil's position in the team. I mean, where do you see this going? Because I would love him to sign a new contract, but it just feels like this is only going one way, in my opinion. I really hope I'm wrong, but I just, when it's not like they're going out and signing, I don't know, like a really unheard of 6 who's 20-year-old and is coming in to be his understudy. I mean, Granit Xhaka isn't coming to Sunderland to sit on the bench. He's had options. Other clubs have came in for him. So if he's coming to Sunderland, he's coming to play. So what do you think this says about Dan Neil?
Well, we started this conversation, didn't we, before we started recording, didn't we? With a few messages going backwards and forwards. I kind of touched on it earlier. I don't think this means the end of Dan Neil. I know he's only got 1 year on his contract, but I think, club captain took us up. We're not just going to kind of discard him like that, even with the financial aspect. I think the club rate him, the club know what type of a player he is. I've said in the past that I actually think he'll flourish in the Premier League because I think he'll have a bit more time on the ball. And I think bizarrely he'll do better than some of those kind of championship midfielders who are like terriers on top of him, because although you do get pressed in the Premier League, I think it's a different type of press. The amount of ex-players you talk to who say, actually, when I went up the Premier League, I was surprised how much time you had on the ball, because it's almost that game of chess rather than people just chasing you around the pitch. But so I think, a successful this season, let's say in his mind, Dan Neil thinks we spent, 20, 30, 50, 70 odd million, potentially 80 odd million on central midfielders. Dan Neil probably think, look, if I play 20 plus games this season, happy days, brilliant. First season in the Premier League, get some games under my belt. We've brought a 32-year-old in who's fantastic. Learn from him for a year or two. Like I said, he's still only 23, never played in the top flight. So you can't hang your hat on Dan Neil. You can't say, well, he's our man for next season to stay up or to finish 17th, to finish 15th, because you just don't know. And then look, we're all gushing over Diarra and Siddiqui over, one pre-season friendly. And look, don't get me wrong, they'll look fantastic. On paper, everything about them, the Diarra one just looks incredible in terms of just getting his signature. But Siddiqui's 20-year-old, Diarra's 21-year-old. And they're both, like I said earlier, they're going to the African Cup of Nations. So, look, you would expect those at some point to either need to acclimatise to the Premier League at the beginning, or they will hit a dip in form at some point during the season. So you need, and you've got your profiles of players. So we've all not mentioned Chris Rigg, who's going to be in that midfield as well. So, but he's an attacking player. So if you bring Xhaka in, you've got Xhaka and Dan Neil, they're probably going to share those duties in terms of mopping up in front of the back four. And then you've got those attacking players with pace. You've got your Chris Rigg, you've got your Lafay, you've got Diarra, you've got Siddiqui. And that's an unbelievable place to be, because what you need is you need almost pairs. So you need a pair of midfielders what you hang your hat on and say, well, they're going to start in this game because of whatever the opposition is. And you need two on the bench, because if it isn't going right, you'll probably swap out the midfield. And then you'll have a completely different dynamic when you bring those on. Or you go a goal down and you think, right, well, we've gone attacking to start with. We've gone with Siddiqui and we've gone with Diarra at a pace. We're now 2-0 up. We want to slow it down. Xhaka and Dan Neil might come on. So it's like that sort of thing. And, you need a group of midfielders. Like last season, how much it almost cost us promotion from the Championship. The fact when Joe Bellingham got suspended, and we were like, oh, bloody hell, how much do we miss him when he's gone? Now, in the Premier League, you cannot just say, right, he's our midfielder, and if we lose him, actually, we're stuffed for a few games. Because one win, one draw might be the difference between us going down and losing out on another, 200 million quid or something the season after, or staying up and staying in the top flight for another year. So you have to have these options. And I think Dan Neil wants to finish the job. He wants to play in the Premier League for Sunderland. And but the thing is, it's a challenge as well. It's like saying to Dan Neil, we're bringing these top class players in. How much do you want it? And he's got everything. He's got all the tools to be that top class player in the Premier League. If he works at it and steps it up, he could be our centre midfielder for the next 4 or 5 years in the Premier League. But, it's his kind of job to fight it out. Or, if he doesn't fancy it and he gets an offer, then look, he's on a Bosman, he's free to go. It's entirely up to him. But you just feel the type of character Dan Neil is, and that his history with Sunderland, he doesn't want to leave. He wants to play in the Premier League with Sunderland. So it's his job to look at Xhaka and step it up and say, well, okay, I'm going to learn from him for a year or whatever, and then I'm going to be the man. So I don't expect him to leave.
Are you expecting a resolution soon, Andrew, on Daniel? Because it feels like almost we need to know soon what's going to happen with him over the long term. I don't think the club are going to want this contract thing to rumble on to January. They're going to want to either have him signed up or move him on this summer, I would say.
Yeah, you're right. The way the club have behaved in previous seasons is quite forward thinking. They're not going to want his contract to run down to the final weeks before making a decision. I'm in a similar boat to Chris there. I think there's definitely a role for Dan Neil. You no longer have this thing where it's the same 11 players getting picked every week, and at the end of the season, the manager's only used 15 players in total. It's a cliche, but it is a squad game now. And just because you're not picked for the first game, that doesn't mean you're now out of the manager's plans. Is we've all been saying, we need options. We need to be able to approach different games in different ways. With Dan Neil as well, we're all talking about him as a purely defensive midfielder. When he came through the academy and when he first started playing first team games, you forget, but he was absolutely brilliant in an attacking sense and threading the ball through tight areas and creating chances and what have you. So Granit Xhaka coming along might be seen as a a way to unlock some of his other skills because he's asked to do different jobs in certain games. So yeah, if it was me, a professional footballer playing for my hometown team, I would see it as a challenge. I would see it as the club are having a proper go and I want to be part of it. And let's be honest, the links for Dan Neil and the rumoured clubs interested in him, I don't think are a better option than Sunderland at the moment. So as long as the club are talking to him and making him feel like he's still got a part to play, I don't know why he'd want to move on at this point in his career.
No. What's your gut feeling, Bomber, on Dan Neil? Where, let's teleport ourselves to September the 2nd or whenever it is that the deadline closes. What do you think happens with him?
So I'm a little bit more conflicted, and I'm probably not as optimistic as Andrew or Chris. The thing that stands out for me, and I can't get my head round, is that obviously he's in the last year of his contract now. Why hasn't that contract been signed yet? Why wasn't there there was probably something written, or verbally or otherwise, that says if we get promoted, this is what your new contract agreement's going to look like. Now, for whatever reason, that hasn't been signed. And I think that there's absolutely no chance that the club are going to let him go for nothing in the summer. So he either signs it before the transfer window goes, or for me, he'll be gone. And I don't know Dan Neil. I mean, he obviously boyhood club, lifelong Sunderland fan favourite. But is he looking at the club making preparations without him, or potentially for life without him, in signing all these centre midfielders, and thinking, actually, maybe my stock as a Sunderland player is never going to be higher, having captained my team back into the Premier League. The club are willing to let me go. The club are willing to move on without me. And does he feel obliged to move on in that respect and maybe lose the Sunderland man tag? It's a tricky one, because whilst I agree there's a place for Dan Neil. If you take out the centre midfielders who aren't going to feature, if we're being frank, the ones who aren't going to be Premier League centre midfielders, your Alan Browns, your Nectar Triantis, although apparently he's a centre back now once again, that only leaves you in the centre midfield with Rigg, Neil, and Lefay, Siddiqui, Diarra. So that's kind of your five. I don't think I've missed anyone there in terms of the players that we.
Can't believe you missed Jay Matete there, mate.
Yeah, I love Jay Matete. But yeah, so that's five. And if we, like you said, if we're talking about playing a midfield three or a two and a one in front, that five goes into three really quite well in terms of rotation for the team and for the squad. So I think the only thing that will prevent Dan Neil from being a Premier League player at Sunderland next season will be Dan Neil, because the club won't let it go on for too much longer, because, like you said, PSR dictates that someone like Dan Neil, if you can get 20 million, 25 million for him, and he's in the last year of his contract with no signal that he's going to sign a new one, they'll put him out the door. And they'll be, thanks very much. Thanks for helping guide us back to the Premier League. And there's probably a little bit of a pride thing with Dan Neil as well. Like you said, he's out of nowhere. It was only 3 months ago he was one of the darlings of the Premier League promotion team, and now already he's almost a little bit of a forgotten man, because he will have gone from club captain in the team out at Wembley, getting promoted back to the Premier League, to fourth or fifth choice centre midfielder. So it's what Dan Neil, how he feels about that professionally, going for first name on the team sheet to, probably a bit part player unless some other things happen. But yeah, I'm not sure. The longer it goes to the start of the season and nothing's announced, the more I think he might well be gone.
Yeah, I think I'm erring more towards what you're saying, Bomber, to be honest. I think look, if Dan Neil has an agreement with the club and wants to stay, I think it'll happen. But I also think, that this recruitment staff, this owner, this sporting director, that they're not particularly sort of set in their ways. Like, they're not going to look at Dan Neil and go, oh well, he's come through the academy, we have to hang on to him. what they'll look at him is do it. Well, if we can't make a resolution here, we'll just sign somebody else. We'll sell you. And to be honest, you said 20, 25 million. I think it would be a hell of a lot less than that. I think they'd be happy to take 10 for Dan Neil. And I think, if a good offer comes along, he might want to be up. He might want to take it. I think we've been in this situation before. The one that comes to mind, and it's obviously a lot less than this, because we're talking about we're in the Premier League now. He's a Premier League player. The figures are a bit higher. But when they got rid of Lyndon Gooch, he was still an important player for the club, but he was coming to the end of his deal, and they were just like, well, ta-ra, we'll sell you to Stoke. They did it with Danny Bath. They did it with Pritchard. They did it with other players, because ultimately they look at this on the sheet and go, well, it's time to go, mate. It's time for you to leave. Your time's been and gone. And I just think if Dan Neil, if we kind of get that deal over the line, or if there's any indication that they're just not going to agree on whatever it is, whether it's money, length, assurances over playing time, captaincy, I don't know. But if there's any indication that they're just not going to come to an agreement, the club will want it sorted sooner rather than later. They won't let it drag to the end of August. They won't let it drag to January. So I am really interested to see where this goes from here. I hope he stays. I really do hope he stays. But I'm not so sure.
But I don't think it makes that much of a difference in terms of them dragging it out, really. Because I think, and you've said, we've talked about them being ruthless, and that's what they are. If you look at the way they're building this squad, there's two. I mean, you've got Luke O'Nien, who, look, let's face it, will sign a new contract. If he hasn't already, I don't think I've missed that, but his contract's up at the end of the season. But I'm sure he'll sign one. But then the two big players outside of that, well, three if you want to count Patrick Roberts. But then you've got Dan Neil, then you've got Dennis Serkin. Now, what the club are doing, if you look at those three players who are out of contract at the end of the year, the club are signing players in terms of, let's just assume they're all going. Because if you look, we've signed multiple wingers. So where Roberts is almost kind of, well, if you're here, you're here. Don't worry. We've signed Reynaldo on the left-hand side, because if Dennis Serkin's off, then he's off. So we've got that kind of left back that already sitting there waiting. So it's like, well, look, if you just want to stay, there's a contract. If not, we'll sort something out. Don't worry about it. And it's like the club are almost saying that they're building regardless, and they're saying, well, we're not gonna kind of wait and say, is Dennis Serkin going to sign a new one? Let's wait, and then sign a left back when he's gone. And then we're almost at the mercy of other clubs saying, well, you're desperate for a left back now, so we'll whack another 5 million on. We're saying, well, he's out of contract at the end of the season, so let's sign a left back and they can fight it out. And if he wants to stay, he can stay. And if he wants to go, he can go. The other thing about Dan Neil is talking about academy recruits as well. You were saying, Gav, you hinted that actually he just might want to go. And we're saying, he's a local lad and he's come through the ranks, and we're thinking that he might not. He wants to stay. But you've heard Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher have both said that actually, as academy recruits, you tend to get a bit shafted in contract negotiations. You only end up kind of making big money if you get a big move away from your original club. And the other thing about the fee is that I think you're right, Gav, in terms of the fee, that you're talking about a player in the last year of his contract where he has never played in the top flight. He's captained the club to promotion, never played in the top flight, last year of his contract. So actually the club might be thinking, I think 10 million if we're lucky in the last year of his contract, because teams will just wait. And if the club look at that, they'll say, hang on, what's actually more advantageous to the club here? Is it to have an extra midfielder for the whole season, where if we lose him, you're saying in financial terms, we lose someone off the books who's worth that bit of money, but he doesn't owe us anything, and we never spent money on them that we're trying to recoup. So is it worth just having that really good extra midfielder for a year and losing them for nothing than it is selling them for 7, 8, 9, 10 million?
The only thing that makes me more pessimistic about it is, why isn't it done yet? We for a guy who is, missed last season, anyway, him and Luke and I basically missed the Sunderland, like you said, Chris, local lad, come up through the ranks, been at the club for, umpteen years. Once we were confirmed as a Premier League team, if he was that desperate to stay, etc., why isn't it done yet? And you could say the same about Dennis Dirk, and you could say the same about Luke O'Nien, but neither of them are Sunderland Academy graduates who are born in the local area that are revered as one of our own. That's the only thing that kind of doesn't sit quite right with me, is why isn't it done yet?
I think, Bomber, I remember towards the end of the season it coming out that Dan Neil was happy for contract talks to be put to one side for the time being. I know what you're saying about the season's over now, why hasn't it been done? For all we know, there has been a conversation behind the scenes and everybody said, listen, this is the plan, this is what we want to do, we will sit down with you on such and such a date and then we'll discuss. But in the meantime, we've not forgotten about you. But I do think that certainly during last season, it was on the agenda and all parties agreed to put it on the back burner. I just think, though, this is a brilliant conversation for us all to have, because we're all talking about what we think the club shouldn't do, but we're all confident that they are having the same discussions. There's going to be nobody in September that goes, oh, bloody hell, what we're going to do with Dan Neil? We haven't given him a moment's thought. These conversations are taking place.
Yeah, but you know what, Andrew? Those conversations will be taking place in the club without the emotion that we'll be talking about it. Because we're talking about, we're talking about the emotion of hanging on to a Dan Neil or Dennis Dirk, and he did well to take us up. Club won't really be thinking like that. The club will be just thinking, there'll be no sentiment in it, really. It'll be like, are they ready for the next stage? And if they're not, and if we're going to bring in a better player, then from a club's point of view, they'll look after the player. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not going to be kind of a case of discarding them and not getting them a deal somewhere else. They'll just say, well, look, we're moving on to our next phase and we'll find you the next stage in your career.
I guess the one thing to look at it, and now I'm thinking about it as we're talking it through, because my attitude, like I said, has always been, well, why isn't it done yet? I guess from a club perspective, they might be waiting to see what they can get through the door, i.e. the likes of the Granit Xhakas and the Habib Diarras, because if those moves don't come off, all of a sudden they think, right, we need to keep hold of Dan Neil. We can chuck an extra 10 grand a week on his contract offer.
Or next summer we might be thinking ahead to next summer, thinking, well, actually, if we stay up next summer, we might want to fill those gaps, and actually we can't have them on the books. So if you've given them a 2 or 3 year contract in the Premier League and you get them Premier League money, that next summer you're trying to bring in players and you're thinking, oh God, actually now our squad's getting really inflated because we can't get rid of these players who we've given 2 or 3 year contracts to.
Yeah, there's lots of moving parts, and as long as these players are all being kept as much in the loop as possible, and they're not just being treated like commodities that can be bought and sold, I don't think you can ask for anything else, really.
Well, I think Sunderland have got a really good reputation now with that. I mean, it goes back to this ownership looking after Corey Evans, and I actually think those things actually go through other players, and the clubs get a reputation for either looking after players or not. Yeah. And I think if you look at the Corey Evans things in terms of you've got a player there whose career is potentially over, but we keep him at the club for a year, we pay him, we get him back on his feet, and we get him a contract somewhere else. Players hear about that; they're all mates. You know what it's like. It's a kind of it's an inside thing, and everyone's talking about it. And then you've got the almost a gentleman's agreement with the top players like Joe Bellingham. Now players know that they come to Sunderland, and if we say, look, we're going to do well for us, we'll do well for you, you get a good deal, years down the line, 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, if a deal comes in, we'll help you move on to your next stage of your career, and we'll all do well out of it. So I think the club are getting a good reputation in that sense.
Definitely. And a word you mentioned earlier, Chris, emotion. We as fans become emotionally attached to some of these players. We see them pulling on the shirt at Wembley and doing well, but you do have to take away the emotion and remember that for the club to go forward, we don't just sign backups. We buy potentially better players to improve those positions and then set the target to Dan Neil. Come on, you've now got to raise your level again. So. Just to be
an old bugger, I remember Peter Reid repeating himself on Premier Passions where he said, I can't find anyone better than what I've got. So really, I can think of a few.
Yeah, well, if you were wondering about the sliding doors moment, that Tommy Watson goal, the difference between what could have been and what is actually happening. I mean, I've just seen Sheffield United have announced the signing of Louis Barry this afternoon. So, that's the difference in the quality of player we're looking at.
He's another one, just very quickly. He's another one. Tommy Watson coming through, handful of games, Premier League club comes in, looking after him, move on to your next stage. We'll bring another one in. And that's the reputation we've got now.
Yeah, we've just about had the here we go off Romano as well. He said that Sunderland have presented their first official bid for Granit Xhaka, and that there's no agreement, but they're aware of Xhaka's desire to join Sunderland, and negotiations continue, and it can only be a matter of time. So let's see. This conversation could end up being completely pointless, but it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, just talking about the midfield, because I think it's the big dilemma that we've got now when we're going out and spending. I mean, let's presume we spend close to 10 million on Xhaka if we get it over the line. That's going to be like 80, 90 million pounds worth of midfielders we've signed already. So it's such a big summer for Sunderland. We're trying to stay up. These conversations, as you said, Andrew, are happening all over the club and in the fan base. And this continues to be a very interesting summer for Sunderland. Let's just put it that way. So, yeah, hopefully Granit Xhaka will be a Sunderland player very soon, and then we can talk about that in a bit more detail and all the things that have come with it, and just the fun and fanfare that happens when you sign such a big name. I think it could well be a pivotal moment in our history if we get this one over the line.
I'm just looking forward to Kirill Louis-Dreyfus getting done for tapping up by the way we've been talking.
I know, yeah. I did see that tweet about this deal from Sasha Tavolieri, who said that Kirill himself has managed to convince the Xhaka family that moving from Germany to Hendon Beach is for him. So we'll see where this one goes. But yeah, good big crack, lads. Thank you very much, Chris. Been lovely. Thank you very much.
No bother, mate.
Yes, cheers, Andrew. Once again, mate. Yeah, sporting more than my own man this week. So yeah, we like to get that one in.
Yes, but it was we've had a bit of a deep dive there, and it was good stuff.
Yeah, and Bomber, as always, go and enjoy whatever you're up to this afternoon with that flashy shirt, mate.
Thank you, mate. Pleasure as always. And just to reiterate what Andrew said, proper good chat, that one.
Yeah. Thanks to listeners. We will be back with another pod tomorrow. Don't know what, don't know where. We'll probably sign somebody else and there'll be another reaction pod. So keep an ear to the ground for that one. Get subscribed to Howie the Podcast. Check out rotoreport.sbnation.com and all of our social media feeds, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky and all the rest of it. We will see you tomorrow. We'll catch you then.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.